Hi, my honeys. This week's episode is the second installment in our series on how to climb the emotional frequency scale. If you are returning to my channel and to this series, thank you so much and welcome. And if you are new here, you are most welcome too. I am just Melissa, and this is Empower Empire, where I share the things that I know and the tools that I've used to help myself in my own life in terms of mental, emotional, spiritual, energetic, and even physical healing. Now, if you have not watched the first part of this series, please stop this episode right now and first go and watch number 1. Because in this episode, we are diving straight in to the negative emotional frequency spectrum and how to climb the rungs of the ladder of that spectrum to higher emotional states. The very lowest emotional frequency that we can resonate with and still be alive is that of shame. Shame is the densest and the lowest emotional frequency. Barely hits 20 in the frequency scale. And so because of that, most of us suppress profoundly our feelings of shame. So much so that we can be completely oblivious to the shame that we carry and the fact that we have embodied that shame. The reason why we carry shame on such a deep subconscious level is because it disgusts us. Shame comes from the mental construct of having received the message somehow in our lives and repeated it as a belief that we are just not good enough. For some reason, in somehow or way, we, who we are in our core, are not good enough. And so we are disgusted by that. And our disgust, think of the word disgust, literally pushes the emotion of shame down to below our guts. We literally hold it where we hold excrement. It is the bleepest emotional state. If only we would excrete it, we would be healthier. But no, we bury the frequency of that emotion way down deep to where we're not even consciously aware that we have any. So until we are willing to actually be in the feeling of disgust, we can't even begin to become aware of our feelings of shame. Just above shame, on the very low negative emotional scale, is the emotional state of hate. That not good enoughness is kept suppressed by the mental construct that we hate ourselves for our mistakes, for our flaws, or we hate others for what was visited upon us as violations, as everything we judge as wrong. But because we also hold the judgment that it's not okay to hate, ever, that hate is a very, very bad feeling, and yes, it is, we also don't allow ourselves to acknowledge that we do in fact feel hatred. And so, it is only slightly above shame in terms of how deeply we subconsciously carry it. And hatred is a death energy. Even in the Bible, hating someone is akin to murder because the energy is the same. So we are literally holding a form of death energy within our bodies in order to suppress consciously the feeling of hate. Now, I'm not saying it's all right to hate somebody. If we become aware of the fact that we are carrying hatred, most especially towards ourselves, then we need to begin the emotional healing work of shifting into forgiveness, which is a process all of its own. But we can't even begin that process if we will not acknowledge, cannot acknowledge, the hatred that we carry. Just above hatred is rage. Rage is that burning feeling that tries to mask how deep our pain is. The pain usually of rejection. Because we don't want to feel our hatred, and we don't want to feel our shame, and we can't even consciously acknowledge them. What we do instead, usually instinctively, as an instant, automatic reaction, is rage. The burning fire that goes up to our minds, and the vitriol, the violence even, that we spew and create, is the result of holding these low and dense frequencies below our consciousness. And then, because we cannot and will not allow ourselves to feel our pain, which masks as rage, our hatred because of the feelings of rejection and violation, and our shame because of not good enoughness, what we can very often feel instead is the emotional state of depression. Depression is that heavy grey blanket that keeps the black emotions of hatred, rage, and shame suppressed. That heavy grey blanket that also always seems to be unconsciously chosen. It just arrives. It descends. And depression comes from the mental construct of turning our negative emotions against ourselves. Because we don't want to express hatred and cannot. We don't want to allow ourselves to express rage and shouldn't. And we can't let ourselves acknowledge our shame. What we feel instead is depression. These 4 low emotional states are shadow states, my honeys. Shifting them is very, very difficult. And we need to do so in tiny baby steps. Simple and minute choices and actions that inch by inch help that state to shift. You see, when we believe that there's nothing we can do, we don't do anything. And so the mental construct that brings on the state of depression is that of apathy, that feeling of futility. And it's not futile, my honeys. Do the tiny things. Make the minute shifts that will eventually turn those shadow states. Because it is so critically important to understand that feeling is a sense, just like thinking is. These understandings have been suppressed because understanding them leads to our power. When you smell a bad smell, you don't think you are the smell. You know that your nose is picking up a bad odor, even though you can smell the smell. A feeling is the same. It's a sense. What we do, though, is we identify with it. We talk about my feelings. We make them our own and thereby embody them. But a feeling of depression, a feeling of any sort, is no different to an odor of any sort. It is not ours. We're sensing it. And when we shift, we allow ourselves to stop sensing it. Much like blocking our nose means we can no longer smell an odor, whether it's unpleasant or lovely. Don't identify with your feelings. Don't make them your own. Just like we don't identify with thoughts. Allow them to come in and go back out. Notice what you need to. This is such a powerful key to shifting emotional states. Then the very first low, dense, and negative emotional state that's starting to become somewhat conscious is the feeling state of guilt. Guilt arises from a mental construct in which we believe punishment is required. Guilt is how we punish ourselves, and we choose to do it consciously. Think of survivor's guilt, for example. In a horrific plane crash, where most of the people die, and the people who survived were powerless to save everybody else on the plane, they choose to feel survivor's guilt about how powerless they were. So we are honestly the worst version of ourselves when we choose to feel guilty, when we punish ourselves with the feeling of guilt like it's some form of redemption. We cannot be even remotely our best and our highest selves when we're coming from powerlessness. Just one rung up from guilt is sadness. Actually allowing ourselves to feel and to be sad. This emotional state does arise from the mental construct that is a victim. But victimhood, for all its negativity, is still an improvement over complete powerlessness. Because we can feel and allow ourselves to believe that we are victimized by something or someone. But there is still a modicum of attachment to self that knows that it is wrong to have been victimized. So it's a slightly higher frequency. Above sadness is the emotion of grief. And grief is much more than simply mourning those who have passed on. Grief is the process that actually allows us to move through our emotional hurt, process our pain and turn it into our power. Grief is an emotional process of its own. Before we can allow ourselves to actually feel grief, we first feel anger. We are angry. Angry at something that we judge. Angry at a violation. Angry at a perceived injustice. And even though anger is still on the negative spectrum of emotions, it is a vast improvement over the emotions that underlie it. But before we feel anger, we are usually occupying the emotional state of denial. I'm going to suppress how I actually feel. Perhaps I'll even exercise some toxic positivity and decide that I'm just going to be positive, or be unhealthily delusional. Everything will somehow magically be fine. This isn't happening right now. a refusal to acknowledge what is. The emotional state of denial is a manifestation of fear. If we can acknowledge that we are afraid, we're afraid to look at the truth, we're afraid of what is, we're afraid of what we feel. That is the first step of being able to move out of that fear. And that summary encompasses the spectrum of the negative emotional states. There are many gradients in between. There are thousands of emotions, right? But those are the main hubs around which frequency collects. So in order for us to choose just a few seconds of bravery, enough to acknowledge that we feel afraid, and choose to become aware of what the reasons might be. It is the stepping into awareness that is our first rung out of the negative frequency spectrum. Awareness is our first neutral state that holds the potential to change our negative polarity. Exercises in awareness on purpose. Mindfulness is so powerful to a personal healing journey because it shifts us out of the negative spectrum. Once we are aware and we start realizing what connects to what and why, it is easier for us by choice to move into the emotional space of acceptance. Acceptance is that beautiful state in which we choose to surrender to what is. It is what it is. Fighting it, denying it, is pointless. When we can accept what is, we can begin to change it. And so it is from the space of awareness and acceptance that we can begin to move into the emotional state of contentment. When I am allowing and accepting, surrendering and becoming aware, it is easier for me to be content. I still have ambitions, I still want more, but I am content with what is. And when I am content, I can become thankful. Thankfulness is what can move me into hope, because I start to see where there may be possibilities, where change might come from. And hope fans the flames, not just of curiosity, but of bravery. And those are the emotional states that can shift us into the truly positive emotional state spectrum, which I will go into in more detail in our next episode. I really hope that this has been insightful and beneficial to you in order to recognize which negative states are suppressing even lower ones. And wherever you may find yourself on that negative spectrum, to be able to reach, not for bliss and nirvana and joy, but for the feeling state that's just slightly above where we know we are currently vibrating. And it is amazing when you start doing this, how quickly the rungs of the ladder can be climbed, as long as we will climb them one rung at a time, instead of trying to make these massive frequency jumps. So my honeys, whatever you are feeling, validate it, acknowledge it, and use the power of your conscious mind to begin making choices to shift those emotional states one rung at a time, with beautiful relief and healing in the spaces between.